All right, Mrs. Horner again. We are going to continue with our story. This is the video for chapter 3. And remember, we're reading My Survival, A Girl on Schindler's List. We met our character Rena and her family, and they were living in Krakow, Poland. And she was just kind of telling us what it was like to be Jewish growing up in that part of the world. So let's continue chapter 3. It is called 1939 War. On September 1st, 1939, the German army invaded Poland. My family was on vacation near Baba Mountain at the time, and we heard the news on our radio. My father was away on a business trip. He also heard the news on a radio and left his trip early to join us at our summer cottage. We must return to Krakow immediately, he told us. We threw our clothes into suitcases and made our way to the train station, where there were hundreds of people rushing to get home. My family and I managed to squeeze into a crowded compartment, and the train departed for Krakow. A few hours later, we arrived at the Krakow station. The sky was filled with the sounds of air raid sirens and German fighter planes buzzing over the city. We hurried home and ran downstairs with other tenants to the air raid shelter in the cellar. Through the cellar walls, we heard bombs exploding in the distance. The German army was approaching. The bombing finally stopped, and we mounted the stairs to our apartment, terrified about what might happen next. The German army occupied Krakow in the first week of September 1939. They marched through the city in parade fashion, their boots pounding on the pavement, while tanks rolled down the streets and shook the ground like an earthquake. Hitler hated Jews. We had known that for some time already, but now his Nazi troops occupied our city, and my father and his brothers gathered in our apartment to discuss what to do. Surely, they agreed, the Germans wouldn't harm women and children. It was the men who were in danger and should run away. Don't worry, they told us. The German invasion won't last long, and soon we will all be together again. My father and his brothers stuffed food and clothes into backpacks, kissed us goodbye, joined other men from our neighborhood on the street, and together they all walked out of the city. I did not know if I would ever see my father again. Weeks went by with no word of whether my father was alive or not. Finally, 2 months after he left Krakow, I was standing outside our apartment building when one of the men from our street came walking home. If this neighbor is back, I told myself, then maybe my father will also come home soon. The next day, he did. My mother and I hugged and kissed him as though he had returned from the grave. The only way we could remain in Krakow and not get deported or killed was if my father succeeded in getting a work permit. We knew we might be killed, but the Nazis posted big place cards on the streets and newspaper kiosks, warning Jews of the consequences of staying without a permit. A permit was a government card that certified the bearer worked at a job that Germans needed done, such as construction or business. My father had mostly recently worked for a pharmaceutical company, going to drugstores to sell goods. But these and other jobs were taken away from Jews, and he became unemployed. One of our apartment superintendent's sons had become head of the supply company where my father used to work. With this man's help, my father was able to resume his job selling hospital supplies, which qualified him for a work permit. At least for the moment, they were legally allowed to stay in Krakow. But that didn't mean we were safe. Life for Jews during the Nazi occupation of Poland grew more dangerous every day. For example, one day my father bought me a puppy. My mother wasn't so happy about that. She said, "If that puppy makes a mess on my floor, you will have to give it away." I had no idea how to train a puppy. Every evening I took the puppy out for a walk so he wouldn't dirty the floor. By then, the Germans had imposed a curfew, meaning Jews were not allowed to be out on the street past a certain time. One evening, I took the puppy for a walk later than usual, and 2 German officers walked by and stopped me. "What are you doing out so late?" one of the officers said. I was so scared I could hardly speak. I pointed to my dog. "Go home," the officer yelled, "and don't be out late again." It was so frightening. My parents saw it all from a window of our building. The next day, they gave the puppy away to the woman who delivered milk to our building. I didn't object. It was a choice between losing my pet or possibly losing my life. By late 1939, when I was 10 years old, life for Jews in Krakow began growing even worse. It seemed like every day a new law was passed against us. One day, the Germans announced that we could no longer own radios or bicycles. Then, they announced that Jews could no longer attend religious services. If we were caught practicing our religion, it would mean immediate deportation or death. After that, we secretly held religious services in our apartment. Sometimes, when the adults were upstairs praying, children downstairs in the street watched to make sure no Germans were coming. If a German officer walked by, the kids on the street signaled to the other kids at the second-floor window. Those kids ran to tell the adults, and everyone hid their prayer books and prayer shawls. Then Jews were ordered to wear white armbands with a blue Star of David stitched on it. The Star of David was a symbol of the Jewish people, and because Nazis did not accept Jews as real human beings, the armband was their way of telling everyone, this person is less than human. In December 1939, the German authorities announced that Jewish children could no longer attend school. My classmates and I were still young, and our parents wanted us to continue learning, so they contacted teachers and paid them to give private lessons to me and my Jewish girlfriends. To avoid drawing attention to these illegal classes, we met in a different home each day and hid our books and papers so no one would know what we were doing. Next, Jews were no longer allowed to use public transportation. We were forbidden from even walking on the sidewalk and had to walk in the gutter. There was worse to come. The German police threw Jews out of their own shops and gave their business to Polish non-Jews. Then they froze our families' bank accounts. With no source of income or money and no access to our savings, we had to be careful with whatever money we had left. Another new law forbade Polish people from doing any business with Jews. This meant that even Jews who had some cash could not buy food in grocery stores. We lived around the corner from a bakery, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, I would stand in line, hoping the baker would agree to sell me a little bread. The only place we could still buy food was the black market, which meant from people who sold food illegally. If caught, we and they would be arrested and beaten, or worse. Across Europe, German armies were conquering one country after another, and rumors filtered back to Krakow that Jews in those countries were being murdered by the tens of thousands. We told ourselves that surely the rest of the world must know what's happening. Surely England would come to our rescue, or perhaps France or America. But where were they? Where was the rest of the world? How much longer would we have to suffer? And could it possibly get any worse? All right, that is the end of chapter 3. So the war has started and the Germans have invaded Krakow, Poland, where Rena and her family are living. So they're getting pretty scared as to what might happen to them. I hope you are enjoying the story so far, and watch the next video for chapter 4.